So thank you for having me. Again, I'm John Garcia from California Lutheran University. And my main area of research and expertise is in finance and business analytics. So the question that I'm exploring here is whether we can use large language model agents to replace human subjects in studies. So one of the issues we have is that humans are messy. You know, trying to disentangle the cause and effect as far as what humans are doing and the behaviors they're exhibiting tends to be extremely difficult, right? So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And trying to decide how one element is affecting the other becomes very difficult because we carry a lot of baggage and we introduce a lot of noise. So the promise that I'm exploring here is, can we use large language models to ultimately enable us to better disentangle the noise from the decision making and more effectively connect the cause and effect between the decisions that are being made? So what I'm doing in this study is I'm trying to assess whether we can evaluate the this phenomena of using this large language model agents in one of the most well-established items we see within, or behaviors we see within finance, and that is that typically we as humans and as investors and traders, we are drawn by what we see. We are drawn by, if we pay attention to it, we want to buy it. And so this is a well-documented phenomenon we see within the finance literature. Now, let me just cut to the chase, and then I'll kind of back into what I looked at here. What I found in this study, and I'll explain in more detail here the elements of the study that I conducted here, is that the large language models themselves, they don't behave like humans. It's well documented that when humans get exposed to attention of a stock, we tend to increase the purchases of that stock 30 to 50%. That's kind of the range. And this tends to be irrational, as we'll talk about and kind of see later on. But when I expose agents, large language model agents, to a similar environment, they actually decrease their buying by about 45%. So whereas humans, we tend to trade not only on logic, but we trade on emotion, right? The fear of missing out and and other similar types of biases that we may have. And large language models, when I provide them this environment, they tend to be skeptical and act much more rationally than any human does. So let me just explain kind of the structure that I use for this experiment. So the first thing that I do is I built 96 synthetic retail investors. And the way I'm defining these investors is based on the literature as far as what a typical retail investor would typically behave, and especially for those Robinhood investors. And they typically follow one of these 6 types of behaviors that you see here on the left. And then I created this environment where they can trade these 4 stocks, Apple, NVIDIA, and then a couple of meme stocks here, ANC and GameStop. And I create this environment where there's realistic price dynamics and they're trading over a 252 period time frame. And I don't just give them information, I actually put them through a realistic 3-stage approach to decide to evaluate the decisions that are being made. So in the first stage, I'm allocating some attention, so they have, like us humans, we have a limited attention span, so they get a budget on how much attention points they have. Then they get some information that is randomly being generated and fed to them, and then they got to make a decision. So it goes through multiple stages, and they are going through these 252 trading days, which is a typical year. And one of the things that I also do is I enable this asymmetric trading rule where in order to buy a stock, you need to pay attention to it. Meaning you need to spend some allocation of attention to it. But if you're going to sell, you can sell without prior research. Much like we as humans, oftentimes when there's panic, we sell indiscriminately. And so we don't necessarily need to spend any attention when we are in panic mode. But when we're going to buy something, we want to have some conviction, typically. Now, the approach, the experimental design that I use here is kind of documented here on the left. And I'm using this staggered kind of difference and difference approach to enable the kind of assessment of what is going on. So I have a control group, and then we have a kind of viral shock that is being introduced to a couple of cohorts here at different intervals. And through this, I'm trying to evaluate kind of what differences in behavior these large language model agents are exhibiting when I expose them to these viral shocks. So that's kind of the idea. And I do employ some manipulation checks, and I do see that they are seeing the attention shocks. And so ultimately, they are reacting to it, but are they actually exhibiting the human behavior? They're not. So again, as I started with, the main takeaway that I see here is that there is a decrease in buying, not an increase in buying as you typically see within human beings. So the average treatment effect on treated agents is, again, is a 11.67 percentage point decrease. So that equates to about a 45% decline from the baseline. And there is no effect on selling. So they're not actually selling indiscriminately, much like humans would. They just stop buying, is what I see with these large language model agents. So they see the hype, the agents are seeing the hype, but they realize that this is just noise. It's not any new information. And they decide to stay away, much like a rational person should be doing, as it's described in textbooks. So they're not really implementing this kind of fear of missing out pattern, which leads to biases. When I look at it across different types of personas, right, I started earlier kind of listing out the different personas, typically you see the biggest effect as far as this bad decision-making around those social momentum type of investors, those that have the fear of missing out. Turns out that those are the ones that actually have the least effect when I evaluate kind of the performance of the decisions being made, whereas dividend seekers have actually among the highest effect. One of the things that I also did in this experiment is I had the large language model agent explain their decision making. And when I look at the social momentum and their explanation as to kind of why they're not trading on certain instances, is they are actually doing the rational thing of saying, hey, it's actually gotten too expensive when there's a lot of attention on a stock. Typically what you see is the bid-ask spread, which is a cost of buying a certain stock, increases when there's more attention to it, and to the point where it makes it maybe irrational to actually go in and pay that to purchase. So they actually quote that in a way that is very rational. They're looking at the transaction cost. I also see that there's no loss aversion within these agents. So typically what you see with humans is we feel pain when we actually sell a stock that's at a loss, right? But when so as a result, we tend to hold on to losers for longer and sell winners quicker. Turns out that these agents actually don't appear to be exhibiting that, and they are selling losers at a higher rate, at approximately 3-to-1 ratio. And so this is kind of a rational, and kind of what the textbook would say is that if it's a loser, it's you're better off maybe looking at better opportunities and not necessarily kind of hold on to a loser. So you got to cut your losses. So it's a very textbook rational approach. So bottom line, kind of what I'm seeing here is that when you look at the training of these large language model agents, there's two forms of data coming in, right? One of the forms is kind of a normative, kind of ideal situation. What did the textbook say? And what is kind of logic would say? On the other side, you have descriptive corpus, which is kind of what does emotion say, what the people are saying on social media, and appears to be following more of a approach of using a kind of a normative approach and using the normative decision-making to make decisions. So let me just cut to the end here, and I'll just say that in the end, what I found is that large language models, they simulate cognition well, logic, but they don't really pick up on the affection, the emotion side of human decision-making. So if we're going to use these for evaluation of decisions, we got to be cognizant that it's not picking up emotional states of decision-making. So that's it. Thank you so much.